Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Eric, and welcome back to yet another interview. This time is a very special one for me. You guys know how much I love Minerva's Den. So today, we have the basically lead designer and writer of Minerva's Den and games like Gone Home and Tacoma. So, Mr. Gaynor, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Good to be on mic with you. Talk some Bioshock. It's been a while since I talked some good Bioshock, so I'm excited to be here.
And we're definitely excited to have you here. So, again, thank you very much for joining
Yeah,
us today. It means a lot.
yeah, by all means.
So, let's just jump into a couple of questions. We can elaborate, just kind of BS here and there. If you want to
Sure.
elaborate on stuff and all that, by all means.
Yeah.
So the first one here is like during the development of Minerva's Den, was there any sort of inspiration or any sort of like real life, I guess, trauma or traumatic event that inspired the overall story? Because it's a rather heartbreaking story once you start breaking down, the death of Pearl and then the redemption of Charles and all that. So, is there anything that happened in your personal life, or is it just something you wanted to really hit home for a lot of the players?
It was definitely inspired by maybe not a specific event, but I think that a lot of um, fiction that tends to resonate with an audience, a lot of times it comes from the anxieties that the author or the creator has. So for me, it actually was in a lot of ways inspired by the experience of working on Bioshock 2, working on the Fear expansion pack that I had been a level designer on prior to that, where there were a lot of like long hours. I moved to a different state to get my first design job before I worked on Bioshock 2, and so I was in a long distance relationship with. We're married now, but she was my partner, my girlfriend at the time, and there was that feeling, that anxiety of like you're really invested in something, a game that you're making, that you're working on, but you're like, I was very familiar with what was playing on the radio at like 11 p.m. because I
Mm-hmm.
was driving home from 2K Marin regularly, at that hour, and just that sort of fear that you have in your mind, that you're sort of like, I'm putting so much time into my work, and there's this person that's so important to me, and what if one day she was just gone and I had been heads down at my computer at my job, and that kind of fear of like, am I missing out, or am I um, neglecting this other you know super important aspect of my life, and wouldn't it just be like, just tear you up to think like, oh, I wasn't there, I was doing this other thing, um, and that was sort of playing out that anxiety, I guess, in the fiction, was where Minerva's Den came from. That Porter kind of gave his life to somebody else's war effort, and he was so obsessively involved with it that when he lost his wife, he wasn't even there, and he didn't, he hadn't been spending that time and investing in her, and then she was gone, and he didn't have the chance anymore. And I think that kind of like, yeah, walking through that, like, what if that thing that you have anxiety about really happened, and playing that out in fiction was sort of the heart of that character and what he went through.
Yeah, and it was like perfectly well done because I can recall the first time I played it too. Just the like raw emotion is what really kind of like punches you in the chest, and it just starts making you think of like what if, or I should have done this or stuff like that.
Exactly.
So it was very very excellently like written. The dialogue was perfect, and just the overall like execution of it
Well,
was near
I mean,
flawless.
I'm really grateful on, like, as far as how that comes across to the player, that we were able to work with Carl Lumbly, who was the voice actor for Porter. I thought his performance
uh, it
really
was,
brought home the
yeah,
humanity
it
of
was
the
incredible.
character.
It was
Yeah.
absolutely incredible. and we'll get to him in like a couple of questions because his performance was one of the better ones I've actually experienced within gaming, even though it was a DLC aspect of it. So
Yeah, yeah,
he should have gotten a lead somewhere. Hopefully, we'll hear more of him soon.
yeah.
Um, so I guess when being asked to develop this DLC, I'm not sure if this was like the intention all along, or it was something that kind of just was a spur of the moment thing because obviously you had the Bioshock 2 multiplayer on top of the base game. Did you ever expect it to be as well received or as well appreciated as it became? Or was it just something that you never really thought would get that much attention and that much acclaim?
I I mean, I hoped that people, I mean, it's like it sounds stupid to put it this way. I hoped that people who played it would think it was really good. You know what I mean? Like, it's really
Yeah.
simple. It's just sort of like, I don't know what kind of audience there's going to be for this. You know, it was 2010, so in a lot of ways it was kind of like the height of DLC having attention put on it, with, you know, things like the Red Dead Redemption 1 DLCs, you know, like the Undead Nightmare DLC and the Mass Effect 2 DLCs that were coming out that were really well done. And other games were sort of looking at DLC as the way that we did with Minerva's Den. Then in a lot of ways it was kind of a standalone small game within the universe of the main game.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, we were well positioned for people to kind of like give a damn about a DLC at all, because it was kind of novel at the time. But, you know, within that, it's like, just numbers wise, before there's like a game of the year edition and it just kind of comes with the game or whatever, the like conversion rate for DLC is really low. Generally speaking, it's like single digit percentage of the people that bought the main game actually buy the DLC. So it was never like, I never was like, oh, this is gonna have a huge audience, but it was, you know, my opportunity to to do something in the Bioshock universe that I just hoped that if I was a player and I played it, I would have a connection to it. And it was really, you know, I set myself the ambition of like, I want to make this DLC that is as good as the best parts of the original Bioshock. You know, of the game that inspired me to want to work on this series. And so I was really, you know, fortunate to have that great game to draw from that I was very familiar with, and that I felt a lot of connection to what made it resonate with me, which in a lot of cases was the being able to discover the human stories of the people that lived in Rapture. And so trying to draw that out and take the opportunity with this smaller story to basically make an entire, you know, small Bioshock experience that's built around what might just be a shorter like audio diary, you know, sequence
Yeah.
in the main game, but really expand that into something where you have a deeper connection with that character than just, you know, a few audio recordings that you find in a larger playthrough.
And how would it feel like with you and obviously the rest of the team that worked on Minerva's Den? I've had a lot of different like messages, comments, interactions, and stuff like that that say Minerva's Den itself is almost, if not better, than the base game of Bioshock 2. So, would you consider that a very high praise, or is that like very meaningful to you as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you know, the 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 fact that the fact is that we were in a really fortunate position because we were making DLC for a sequel to a really great game. So like we had all these years of learning what makes this game work. You know, like what is great about this? What if we're doing a DLC could we expand on and emphasize? So on the one hand, we were in a really great position to basically like take all of that learning and refinement and put it into a package that could kind of reflect the series in its best light at that point. But you know, that said, yeah, like you were saying, the fact that, you know, it's a it's a DLC, it's a shorter experience, you know, it's very compact compared to the main game. And the fact that people could um, get that much out of something that has, relatively speaking, such a small footprint, and in a lot of ways it's such a small story, um, really just makes it feel like it was a success to me, because that was what I hoped, was that we could use what Bioshock is to make this connection to one person's personal experience really powerful,
Mhm.
in a way that, the best moments in Bioshock made me feel connected to the characters in Rapture, and expand that into kind of the identity of Minerva's Den as a whole.
And I think with the way that obviously it was written as the story played out and all of that, it felt like it could have been its own standalone game. Like it could have been like a whole new entry in the Bioshock series. But I just wanted to give you massive props and your whole team massive props for giving that like very, very emotional but very memorable experience. So
Thank you very
thank you.
much. Yeah, no, I mean, we were a team of, there was 9 people full time, I think, on that. We had a lot of support from the larger studio at 2K Marin, but the dedicated team, yeah, I think was single digit number of people, and I think we all felt very, very proud of the fact that, we did see those kinds of responses when it came out, and we all, I think, felt like we were able to put ourselves into making that DLC. That it is sort of something that it's small enough that you can kind of put your thumbprint on it. So I do think that we were really fortunate to have such a great, experienced team that was putting their heart and soul into it, and we definitely really appreciate the response that it's had, especially this far on. Still occasionally, like, I mean, it's dumb, but every once in a while I have just like searched Minerva's Den on Twitter, and it's wild to me seeing that there's still just people like posting, 10 years later, about Minerva's Den, just because they just played it, or they're replaying it, or they're like, responding to someone asking what your favorite DLCs are or whatever. And I'm like, that's something that I never would have thought, like, oh yeah, people are going to be talking about this DLC we're working on 10 years from now. But it's really cool to see.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say like that's dumb. That's kind of like talking down on yourself a little bit. That should be something that's like, hell yeah, I made this thing, and people
Oh
are
no, I
still
mean, no,
talking
I
about
think
it
that I
that
think
much
that's
later.
cool,
Yeah.
but like name searching the DLC on on
Oh no,
Twitter.
no, 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 no. That's completely okay. That is completely okay. Plus, you have every right to do it. I mean, you were a big part of it, so it makes sense.
Yeah,
So
sure. Yeah. No, but it's great to know that it's continued to connect with people even this far on.
yeah, for sure. So when coming up with like all the different like level designs within Minerva's Den, just going from like point A to point B, obviously, and stuff like that. Obviously, the new weapons, the new plasmids like Gravity Well, the Lancer Big Daddies, which are my personal favorite.
Oh, thank you.
Was this something that you were told to do, or is this kind of like a brainchild from the whole team? And also, is there any part of Minerva's Den that you wish would have been included within Bioshock 2 itself?
Oh, you mean like
Like,
like like player
yeah,
abilities,
like the
or okay?
weapons or gravity well,
Yeah.
the ion laser.
Yeah. Well, so definitely there was a certain level of like requirements from the publishing side that are like, this needs to be a story DLC. It needs to have a new weapon, a new plasmid, a new like Big Daddy type. Those were like, you need to check those boxes, because that's what we want to say is in the DLC.
Yeah.
But like that's cool, because it means that, especially since any part of Rapture has a very specific purpose and has like a theme to it, whether it's Hephaestus, which is completely industrial, or the fisheries, that has this very kind of um, I don't know, sort of grimy, like underbelly of the city feeling to it.
And then you have places like Fort Frolic too.
Right.
So
Yeah. Which is like, or Arcadia.
yeah,
They're so unique to themselves and their sense of place, that it allowed us to say like, okay, well, Minerva's Den it's the computing center of Rapture. It's all about like the high technology of Rapture, not necessarily like the plasmid technology, but the the computerization, the advanced scientific R&D that happens there. So saying things like the new weapon and the Big Daddy and the plasmid that have to be in the DLC, they can help reinforce the identity of the place. That this ion laser is this piece of kind of like prototype, weapons technology that's been developed here. And then the Big Daddy that we add into the DLC, taking advantage of that technology that's local to the place. Hopefully it makes it all feel like it is reinforcing its own identity through all those different elements. Um, as far as like things that I wish had that we could have kind of like backfilled into the main game. I mean, as a designer, I don't think that the problem with Bioshock is that there's not enough stuff in it already. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, you've got like a dozen guns and I don't know how many plasmids and all of your upgrades to that stuff. I'm like, if anything, I think that there was that was an interesting design challenge for Minerva's Den, because I was just feeling like I was a really big proponent of games that were shorter and had no wasted space in them at the time. I'm like, on some level, I'm sort of like, any game that's 20 hours long could probably be 10 hours long, because it's just like, put all the good stuff into a smaller package so that you're just like no filler. You're having some kind of new experience or impactful moment at any given time. And so I was excited to say, let's do a single player DLC. It's only 3 levels. It all takes place in one section of the city, but it has the full Bioshock progression compressed within that. So like, you start with a melee weapon and 1 plasmid, and by the end of this DLC, you've gotten access to all the weapons, all the plasmids, all the upgrades. You're kind of like, it's more about building what your playstyle is by getting rapid access to the full potential arc of kind of the player progression in a Bioshock game, but in a very focused single space. But it was interesting to kind of discover the ways in which Bioshock isn't built to be compressed that way. And the one that really stood out was, as you know, in Bioshock 1 and 2, the way that you upgrade weapons is you find an upgrade station and then you choose one of your upgrades. And the thing that I realized was, like, if we only have 3 levels and you get 8 or 10 guns, and we want to give you the opportunity to fully upgrade them if you want to, there would be an upgrade station in like every room or like 2 or 3 upgrades. They would just be covered in upgrade stations. And so it was a cool constraint that led us to say, okay, we can't do that. That just doesn't make sense, but we want to let the player upgrade weapons. So what if we put in this kind of like mini mechanic within Minerva's Den, where you just find a base weapon, and then later, if you explore, you can find an upgraded version of that weapon, and we kind of choose what upgrades that has in it, but it sort of focuses down that mechanic into something that fits the space while also supporting the idea of kind of rapidly building this power curve over the course of just however long it takes you to play through, 5-6 hours, something like that. I don't even remember where this question started, but that's where the answer ends.
Hey, that's okay. Like I said, we can just talk about whatever. Just let your mind wander. That makes for an even more, like, I guess, impressive interview, just to be able to talk about whatever.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, did I actually answer the question?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say you answered it pretty well. Cool. And the one part you brought up,
you were like, is there anything you'd want to put back into the main game? Yeah, I'm just sort of like, I feel like you've already got such a wealth of choice of stuff to play with that I think the main game had plenty enough going on already. But it was cool to get to add to the arsenal and to the kind of taxonomy of Big Daddies in Minerva's Den, for sure.
And I like how you did bring up two separate things as well. I really enjoyed the fact of being able to kind of bring back that like looter shooter feel where you get
Mm,
to like, look for certain things for upgrades. And the
yeah.
fact that you can actually upgrade your weapon by just randomly finding it on like a dead Big Daddy or in some random room, I thought that was extremely well done. And then when you brought up the Thinker as well, what was the inspiration for that in particular? Was that kind of like a callback to maybe the System Shock days where you had like the AI, or was this like a whole new like thought that you wanted to implement into the DLC?
It was definitely inspired by System Shock, and it was specifically uh, an idea that came to me from JP LeBreton, who had been a level designer on Bioshock 1, and he was the lead level designer of Bioshock 2. And he told me a story about how himself and Paul Hellquist, the who would be the lead designer of Bioshock 1, when they were just like in the design pit, they were just bullshitting, and we're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was like this primitive AI that you found in Rapture, and then it was implied that like, you take it out of the city with you, and that's like the thing that ends up being Shodan in the System Shock series. So it's like this connection, and obviously, canonically the two series they don't share IP or anything, so it would all just be kind of this like fan, kind of implication if you knew what it was going for. And I was so anyway, so I was like, well, yeah, let's just do that. why don't we just actually we had a DLC? What if we just did that for real? It's a funny idea to me. Um, and so it dovetailed with the the fundamental inspiration for the DLC of just like, if we want to make a new part of Rapture, what is it? And I had, as someone who'd spent who knows how many hours with the original Bioshock and Bioshock 2, I was sort of like, this the technology in Rapture really clearly implies that there is computerization and that there is some amount of like, if not AI, then robotics, because you have these self-guided flying security drones that it sounds like somebody has a remote control somewhere. They're
Yeah.
clearly like using sensors and navigating and doing target acquisition. You've got the turrets also that are scanning for targets and locking, and they seem totally autonomous. So
And the pneumo machines
somewhere,
as well, if you remember
yeah,
those.
yeah. I mean, yeah, like how you would route pneumo deliveries of
Yeah.
that complexity throughout an entire city. And so my starting, my inspiration in that sense was just like, computerization is happening in Rapture somewhere. Where is the computer stuff in Rapture? Where does all this computerization come from? Where was it invented? And if this is a mid-century kind of like 50s 60s setting, even if they had highly advanced kind of like sci-fi technology within the Bioshock universe, it seems like there would still be some like massive mainframe computer somewhere that we
Yeah,
haven't seen before.
for sure.
So for me as a player, it would be exciting to kind of like be able to have my curiosity answered about where did this stuff come from and who invented it and who is that person as one of the personalities of Rapture. And so yeah, those things went together, and yeah, the idea was, I always wanted to have this, this not exactly primitive, but this very kind of like like foundational AI, this early AI creation that was built using the technology of Rapture, that the player helps it escape the city by the end, so that we could maybe imply that it led to AI technology that would be the center of the System Shock series. And from there, the work was to figure out like, that's just like the framing concept. So who is the inventor of this? What is the identity of the AI itself? What is the story that it's involved with in Rapture in the 1960s when you encounter it?
Okay, so now we're gonna switch games here a little bit because I mentioned this at the beginning as well, and this is kind of a huge fan theory, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot too. and it's a little bit about Gone Home. So we were talking
Cool.
about kind of like a shared type of thing between System Shock and Bioshock. Is there anything in relation or in correlation between Gone Home and Minerva's Den? Because I've noticed that there's quite a few Easter eggs. I believe there was a SNES cartridge, which was Super Spitfire, and it was made by CMP Interactive.
Yeah.
So, is there any correlation between the two games, or was that just like a little fan service Easter egg? Like, hey, still remember you guys if you played Minerva's Den, because I thought that
Yeah.
was really awesome. So,
Yeah, no, it's it's sort of like the the Bioshock to System Shock connection where none of it is official, but as sort of like the being series fans ourselves and just being fans of like making those little like winky implied connections. Yeah, so there's Spitfire in Minerva's Den, there's Super Spitfire in Gone Home, and in Tacoma there's a character who's playing an AR game that I think is called Spitfire Returns, if I remember.
I think so.
So yeah, there's a through line of Spitfire making a cameo in all the stuff that I've gotten to be a lead on. And yeah, CMP Interactive, the headcanon, the like unofficial, the way I think of it is that um you brought all the the mainframe programming with you from Rapture to the surface, and that included Spitfire and um, Porter when he returned to the surface. Presumably had like a hardware and software company of some sort, and I'm thinking by the 90s that they've probably like licensed Spitfire to some
Well, yeah,
company that now
probably.
that now is publishing sequels. But yeah, it's supposed to be a real winky little connection. Also, the we never name it, but um, the logo of the sorry plane ticket that you have
Wasn't that from
that
Bioshock 1?
yeah, it's sort of like an '80s rebranding of the airline from that was on the tail of the plane in the original game. It's just a letter A, but if you
Yeah.
recognize it, maybe it seems like it has some connection.
And this one might be a bit of a stretch too, but I've been told this by like multiple people, and I have it in like an Easter egg video of mine as well. I believe like once you enter, and there's a closet like to the right once you enter, there's a like Letterman jacket with an owl on it, and it kind of resembles the Minerva's Den owl. Was that
Yeah,
intentional, or was that kind of like a
yeah. It
stretch?
no, it definitely was. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was on purpose. The Goodfellow high school owls. And the super super deep lore there is that naming characters is really hard, and generally if you're naming a main character you go through a ton of like what if they're named this, what if they're named that, and you kind of kick it around and you're like, oh well, the thing that's hard about names is like they have to sound good just by themselves. Like the last name has to sound good by itself, and it has to sound good with the first name and the last name together, and it has to not be like, oh, it's some character from other book we forgot, like whatever. So you kind of you're going through until you find something that actually works and isn't like from some movie that you forgot that there was a character named that. So one of the earlier names before we settled on Porter's name was Goodfellow. So the high school is actually like named
I did
after
not know that. That's
well, yeah,
actually
that's
really really cool. Thank
extremely
you for
deep
sharing that,
like
by the
dev
way.
lore, but
I wish I would have known
yeah.
that. I would have incorporated that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so obviously we mentioned this earlier too. You worked on Bioshock 2 for a little bit, so you were technically employed by Irrational, right?
Oh,
Or
you mean
like,
Bioshock Infinite?
yeah, sorry, I don't know
Okay.
why I said
Yeah, yeah.
2, but yeah, Infinite.
We've been talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Bioshock 2, I was there from really early. I was the 16th employee of 2K Marin, so I was pretty much there for the full development of that game and through the DLC. But then yeah, I after Minerva's Den came out, I took a little bit of a break and then went to Irrational to work as a senior level designer on Bioshock Infinite for just about exactly a year.
And then Is there anything in particular that made you leave that project to go enter Fulbright, or is it just something that it was like mutual for both parties to kind of break away and do their own thing?
I mean, you know, I was like, I was contributing, I think, meaningfully to the project. But on the other, I was just an employee, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I had spent a year in Boston at Irrational, and my wife and I had moved there from San Francisco, where we had lived for 5 years, and now we're back in Portland, Oregon, and in a lot of ways, it was like I wanted to go out there to get to work with so many of the people that made the original Bioshock and be able to be involved with a new vision of kind of the next incarnation of what Bioshock was. And I'm incredibly grateful for the time that I spent there. I feel really fortunate that I got to work so directly with Ken and with Stephen Alexander and with Nate Wells and so many of the people that made the original Bioshock what it was, and learned from how they work. Um, but after we had spent a year there, on some level, Boston didn't totally agree with my wife and I. It just wasn't a place we could see ourselves being long term. And there was something about the contrast in experience of going from Bioshock 2, there was like 80 or 90 people making a pretty big game,
Yeah.
to Minerva's Den, 9 people making this really small thing that we could really kind of hold in our hands. And then going to Bioshock Infinite, there was like 150 people making something that was even bigger than the biggest thing that I had worked on. And I just kind of I think I just arrived at that point where I was just sort of like, I don't think that I want to work on games that are this big anymore. You can't even see the whole thing from inside of it. You don't know a bunch of the people that you work with. And that scale can lead to creations that you can only make at that scale. Like there's games that I absolutely love that you need hundreds, sometimes thousands of people to make this thing, and they have incredible value to them. But for myself and for the point that I was at in my career, I was just sort of like, I think I want to work smaller, And the point that I joined the studio at Irrational, you know, I was sort of like, if I stay through shipping Bioshock Infinite, it's probably going to be another couple years. You know what I mean? But if I really kind of want to be working on smaller stuff, I need to do the responsible thing and like bow out, respectfully thank everybody for having me and letting me contribute what I could, but to kind of bail early enough so they could actually replace me without it just screwing a bunch of people over. Because if you quit like 6 months before ship, there's a ton of people that are just like, well, how are we gonna? Well, I guess I just have to do extra work. But if I kind of knew that I just had a different path to follow, it just made sense to try to do that early enough that it was like easy to kind of recover and fill that spot within the rest of the dev time that they had. So yeah, I took that kind of year point to say my wife and I were just gonna move back to Portland. The number one thing that we wanted to do was be in Portland, which is where we wanted to end up. It's kind of like my adoptive home. It's where my wife's family is from, and then figure out what that meant, as opposed to like, it wasn't about finding some other job. It wasn't about chasing a job somewhere. It was about like, we want to be in this place and then figure out what that means. And that ended up being the impetus for, there's not an established game industry in Portland. I couldn't just apply for a job like you could in LA or San Francisco, or like I did in Boston at Irrational. And it meant that if we want to keep doing this thing, I kind of have to start my own thing. And so that's really what led to Fulbright, was necessity being the mother of invention in that in that case.
And plus happiness too, because I'm sure going from a studio that probably had hundreds upon hundreds of people, where it seems like maybe everything's kind of like a bit of a clusterfuck, and not being able to like get your input out there versus actually being happy doing what you're doing, I'm sure that
I
might have
mean,
been a little bit.
I was very fortunate because I was able to have a lot of direct input into Bioshock Infinite when I was there as a senior level designer. A lot of my job was like writing up basically like level pitches and then bringing them to Ken and then like kind of like kicking them around and developing them. But there was a lot of sort of like the leads in the management group, the people who are in charge of the studio are like, these plot points have to happen in this level, and these weapons or enemies have to be introduced. Um, so get us from point A to point B. You know what I mean? And so I was very fortunate and grateful to be able to say like, my job is to put together these level pitches and then work on them with like the most senior people at the studio to turn them into what fits the vision of the game and what the group is kind of in charge of the production feels like it needs to be. But it was a very like collaborative kind of back and forth of developing that stuff. So for me, it really wasn't anything about my experience at Irrational that was really a motivator, aside from the fact that it's just like, this game is so huge. I think I don't know if games that are this huge are really what I want to devote my life to at this point. But during the time that I was there, yeah, I felt like I gained a ton through learning, and I think and I hope I was able to contribute a lot to what the game ended up being, even though I wasn't on the team for the last year and a half or 2 years that it was in development.
All right, that's all I'll say. My apologies for that. It just seems like with this like huge group of people, it would seem like it would be kind of hard to like get ideas pushed across or like to relay information from like team to team to team to team. So that's my
Yeah, no, I
apologies
mean
there.
like manage. Well, I mean managing such a large organization is definitely a huge challenge. Like, and
Yeah, of
like you said,
course.
like people being informed enough about what's happening throughout this entire production is a huge challenge. Uh, but me as an individual, I was in a space that I was very fortunate to actually be able to be kind of at the center of a lot of those discussions, along with Ken and along with other folks at the studio. And I feel really lucky to have been able to be involved at all in that part of that game.
So now let's go to a different Bioshock here.
Okay.
With the announcement of the new one by Cloud Chamber Studios,
Yeah.
what is your initial thoughts about that? And obviously, with like people coming back, I believe Sean Elliott was one of the bigger ones that came back. Um,
Hoagie's
there's,
on that, right?
he,
Hogarth de la Plante.
I believe he came back as well.
I believe so. He was the art director on Bioshock 2, so I worked with him a lot on that game.
Yeah, and there was a couple of others that came back to the studio along with like a lot of people from Hangar 13 as well.
Right.
So what are your personal thoughts? Like, where do you see them potentially going with it? Just from like what you've worked on in Bioshock, what do you think is that next step moving forward?
Well, they haven't shared very much about it yet publicly, right?
Yeah,
Like I
it's
feel like
been
most like,
really hush hush.
yeah, because it's like there's a new Bioshock in development by Cloud Chamber, and basically some like job listings, right?
Yeah,
Is kind of all the information there. So you can kind of assume some things from the job listings. Like, isn't there?
a lot of
It
it
was pretty.
is going to be
It was kind of
like,
like open worldy kind of stuff, right? Like,
yeah, there's been a lot of rumors about like open world stuff about like kind of like a Fallout dialogue system, which I'm not sure
huh,
like how I feel about that yet. I mean,
yeah,
if it's done well, by all
yeah.
means go for it if it gives you a more immersive story, but I'm kind of weary on the whole online thing, especially with the way like microtransactions and stuff like that's going right now. I just don't want that to
Did they
be a
have a
big
bunch of
part.
listings for like online
Yeah, there was
architecture
a
stuff?
lot for
Oh,
like
okay.
level design for like specifically stuff like that. So
Huh. I wonder if they're aiming for kind of like, I mean, it's 2K, so they're a subsidiary of Take Two, so presumably they've seen how much money GTA Online makes. So I mean, maybe they're trying to do like a Red Dead Online, GTA Online style of thing, but in a Bioshock world. I mean, as we know, a Bioshock setting doesn't have to be Rapture, it doesn't have to be Columbia. So
Exactly. They
yeah,
can basically like put you wherever, just as long as like it makes sense story wise.
yeah,
And I think
it's
like
this society that has a conflict that's at the center of it, that leads to that kind of like player mechanical experience of being within this contested space that is driven by the personalities that define, the society itself. Yeah.
yeah, and like with you were mentioning with like GTA Online and like Red Dead Online, if it's something like that, because obviously it's been extremely successful, I think I would be okay with that. But then you have to look at the other side of the coin too. And I know the game's been getting progressively better over time, but you have to look at something like the launch of like Fallout 76 and how they tried to, push that type of narrative, and it just flopped at the beginning. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like I don't know. Like I'm still kind
Yeah.
of hesitant about it and still cautious, but
It seems really unpredictable, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah, for
Like, I
sure.
mean, like at the end of the day, like I've played GTA Online, I've played Red Dead Online, I've played a lot of games that are in that sort of like, whatever you call it. It's like it's a little bit MMO-y, but it's not. You know what
A
I
little
mean?
bit,
It's
yeah.
a sort of like online spaces that they have missions and they have narrative in them, but you're also kind of in this chaotic world within that of other players just kind of like wilding out. And I like I enjoy a lot of online stuff when I get to play with friends. I mean, I have hundreds of hours in like PUBG and Call of Duty Warzone. um, but the stuff that connects with me really deeply is almost always that really like solitary immersive single player experience where you can just have this kind of like communion with the game itself and with the game world and the characters and the experience of being there. Not in like a literal kind of like VR kind of sense, but just
Yeah,
that
but
it's this
you're
crafted thing that you're
there.
part
Yeah.
of, right? And so, my gut reaction is like, I want that Bioshock experience that's very like intimate in that way, and kind of like an open world online thing sounds like is the other end of the scale from that. But
Hmm.
that said, with so little information, it's kind of like you're saying, if they reveal this game and it comes out and it's like, this isn't the Bioshock I pictured, but it's fucking amazing, then like it's amazing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I'll be really excited to play it. It's just I got no idea what's going on over there, and I'll be interested to see what their interpretation of it ends up being.
Yeah, mine too. And a lot of people are still like kind of throwing shade, but you got to give them a chance. It's a brand new studio. They're bringing a lot of people that have worked on previous Bioshocks and,
Yep.
other critically acclaimed games as well. So just give them a chance.
Yeah.
But in terms of like what you were saying, I think the way that they should go is obviously if they want to do the online stuff, have that separate. Don't make that the integral part of the game. You should have your regular, main story where people can just focus on that, and then this could be something to get that like audience retention,
Yeah.
to keep people
Well,
playing and stuff like that
I
as
mean, maybe
well.
that's what they're doing. I mean,
I hope so.
GTA Online obviously was the online mode of GTA 5 that
Yeah.
was a whole single player experience. Same with Red Dead 2. Um, and they've got to know that, especially like the critical apparatus, reviewers are going to be like, well, we want that, like, that story driven Bioshock experience. So it would be really surprising to me if the online part and the open world part was like the only part of the game. So I would be pretty optimistic that there will be like, a single player kind of crafted story aspect of it, and then this online side that maybe is integrated. Maybe it kind of like overlaps some if you're playing online or whatever, but sort of, I don't know, maybe in like some sort of Dark Souls ish kind of way or something. But
Yeah, like a
um,
co-op type thing. I think that would
yeah,
be like perfect for Bioshock.
yeah. I mean, I think it would. Yeah, Bioshock co-op would be really interesting, and it was in a lot of ways sort of conceptually what the very first teaser for Bioshock Infinite was about. Was it was sort of like Elizabeth was like your co-op partner. You know, like she would set up opportunities for you to take guys down. And in an actual co-op situation where maybe you have conceptually a very limited set of plasmids that any one player can have, but they combine together to be really powerful. So you have to like actually use tactics to be effective. That could be super cool and interesting.
And it would definitely be like a new iteration in terms of like the series itself. So I think that'd be pretty cool, especially being able to play with like one of your best friends or something that's never even tried the previous Bioshocks. That could open up like a whole new world to them to try all three beforehand. So
yeah,
we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose, with that one.
Yeah, I'll be interested for sure.
For sure. Okay, so let's see. We already went over that one. I don't know why I held that card. Ooh. So, other than that, I ended up doing a little bit of research and digging about some stuff that you put online, by the way. And I came across this website, and I'm not sure if you remember this. You probably do, but it was a list of some of your favorite things.
Oh yeah.
And I just kept scrolling and scrolling, and I noticed Silent Hill 2.
Mm-hmm.
Badass game.
Yeah.
So have you always been like kind of drawn towards like the scary and horror games? And also, is there any part of like that sort of genre that you would want to incorporate when you were doing Minerva's Den or anything like that, or even future games for that matter? Or is that more of just like something you like to do on the side in like your free time?
I mean, I've never been. I wouldn't call myself like a horror game fanatic of any sort. There's people who are way more into horror games than I am, but there are horror games and scary games that I'm a huge fan of. Silent Hill 2 is obviously one of them. The original Amnesia is definitely one. I mean, I love the Resident Evil series. Some of them are like scarier than others, but I really loved what they did with Resident Evil 7 because it really kind of brought that series back to survival horror in this very kind of like claustrophobic, I think legitimately kind of unsettling way that the series hadn't been for a while.
Yeah, RE7 was incredible.
I'm hyped for Resident Evil Village. I can't wait.
I still want to call it Resident Evil 8, so it's going to take a while for me to call it Village, but it definitely looks like it's going to be an amazing game. But
yeah,
sorry, I didn't.
So I love some like there are horror games that I love, but I wouldn't say like there's some people who are like horror movie fans, and I'm not like kind of like a genre obsessive in that sense, but the things that Silent Hill 2 in particular have been really influential upon me is that there's that central kind of emotional longing and regret that is communicated between James Sunderland and his wife Mary, and that they've been separated and can they be brought back together. And I mean that's a central theme of Minerva's Den, is the kind of tragic arc of Porter losing his wife and then being like, but I could recreate her with this technology I've invented. And then when he finally does it, sorry, spoilers.
No. I've never like put those parallels together. Like now that you actually like put it side by side, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so, like that feeling of kind of longing, I guess, that's expressed within, in Silent Hill 2, this very kind of surreal, terrifying, metaphorical space. That's always been hugely influential on me. And in a similar way, just the it's a really specific thing, but when you first play Silent Hill 2 at the very beginning, there's the voiceover where Mary just reads the letter, or actually at the beginning it's James reading the letter. At the end of the game, Mary reads the letter. But there's that voiceover of like reading this letter that James received in the mail and hearing the vocal expression of that message and how, you know, how central it is to the entire narrative and to those characters, and just that tone and that mood was definitely a big influence on the audio diaries in Gone Home, of just that kind of feeling of the I guess the, you know, the rawness of emotion that comes with saying those moments out loud. um, and definitely there are a lot of people who think of Gone Home as basically being a horror game because at the beginning you don't really know how safe you are, and I know that some people who have played Gone Home are like, it's the scariest game I've ever played, and I was like, oh, I didn't even I didn't
Really?
even
I
mean for it
mean,
to be
yeah,
that scary.
it wasn't too
Yeah.
bad at all.
No, I mean, I think it's just a question of how uh, deep fried you already are by like horror games. You know, like I don't find I love a lot of horror games and I don't find them that scary. You know, so it kind of takes a lot for me to really feel like fear from a game. So I think that if you are a lot more susceptible, then that's one part of it. But I think also um, if you just have that kind of imagination that tends to, you know, like wonder what's in the dark in a room, you know, you haven't turned the lights on and you're just like imagining shapes in the shadows.
Yeah.
I think Gone Home really plays into that natural fear of the unknown that some people I think really connect with. um, but yeah, you know, my favorite parts of Bioshock are when it feels like a survival horror game, and I love, you know, like that feeling of light and shadow and kind of creeping through the dark and hearing the far off, you know, splicer voice and not knowing exactly where they are, and that tension that I think resonates so much with, you know, classic survival horror games, like the Silent Hill series and like the you know, original titles in the Resident Evil series. um, is just a mood and a feeling that is really kind of exhilarating to get from a game.
Yeah, and plus with the whole like unknown and uneasy feeling, I think that kind of amplifies it as well. So that's definitely the way to go for that.
Yeah.
So I guess we can go like merge back now towards like the Minerva's Den side of things as well.
Sure.
So when doing like the casting and stuff like that for like the actors, actresses, and all of that, did you have anyone else in mind for Charles Moulton Porter besides Carl Lumley, or is that the person you wanted right off the bat? Because I
Well,
feel
yeah.
he nailed everything that he touched in that role, and I
Yeah, I
honestly
agree.
don't think I could like envision anybody else, especially
Yeah.
like when you would hear like the breakdowns over the audio diaries or the ending when he's finally letting Pearl go, like you can feel like he actually lost someone. So
Yeah.
it was incredible. But
Yeah.
was
I mean,
he the
there's a
guy?
few things about that. One, I have to give all the credit for that to Jordan Thomas, who is the creative director of Bioshock 2. You know, I had great input from Jordan and from Zach McClendon, who was the lead designer of Bioshock 2, um, during the development of Minerva's Den. And Jordan was the one who recommended that we try to reach out to Carl Lumbly because he knew of Carl's work from a superhero TV show from the 90s called Mantis, where it was sort of really ahead of its time because it was a superhero show from before, you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was like a thing. But it was also a character piece. It was like about this guy who had a secret identity, but it was about who he was as a person when he wasn't in the suit as much as it was like a superhero show. And Carl was the lead. You know, he played the main character in that show. And he's been in a number of other productions, but that was kind of the piece that Jordan was like, I always loved the this performance and this character, and Carl Lumbly as that character, and he's got a great voice. You should see if you should get him. And so, you know, then I was like, oh well, let me check out his stuff, and I, you know, watched some video, and I was like, you're right, he's great, and he was available, and you know, we made it happen. And it was really cool because um, I had never I had been on some calls for like voice directing stuff, but sort of like indirectly in a way, you know, because I helped with some writing on the main game of Bioshock 2, like some audio diaries and stuff like that, just some like secondary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had been somewhat involved with a little bit of voice direction or voice recording sessions in the past. But for Carl, they, like many actors, he's based in LA. We were in San Francisco at the time. They flew me down to LA to do the voice recording session in person in a recording studio in Santa Monica. So I got to meet him in person. We spent like 20 minutes, half an hour when we first got together, just talking about the character and the story and the setting, and who Porter was. And then we got to do the recording. He's in the booth. I'm in the behind the console with the recording engineer and everything. And we can have that direct connection, kind of like eye contact while we're like talking through notes or whatever. Um, but something that we did for the the role for the recording was we recorded the script in order, and he had only gotten the script like when he arrived at the studio, so he hadn't read through it prior to recording. So we read it chronologically, and very intentionally we didn't tell him the twist that the character he was playing is actually the thinker impersonating him, because we didn't want to put that headspace into him that like he's like, oh, I'm playing a computer that's playing as me. Like we just wanted him to be playing the character, like without any artifice, so that when the reveal happened, there wouldn't be that kind of like artificiality setting it up or whatever. So we were reading through it, and then when we got to the point where he needed to read the lines that were about the identity reveal, I told I kind of walked him through it and was like, this is the point where you're discovering that this voice you've been hearing all along is you, and you didn't know it. You're kind of like recovering these memories of what it meant to be this person, the connection that you have with him. So it's this very impactful moment. And Carl just goes, wow, so it's a real shock to the system, huh? And I was like, precisely, sir. You don't know
Gotta
how
throw
right
the
you
pun
are.
right in there. Yeah.
Because like total coincidence. It's not like he knew that we were making any kind of System Shock reference, and I was just like, could this be more perfect? And yeah, he's just such a professional and has such a presence to his voice. um, he's the voice of Odin in Tacoma, and we were so like grateful to have him again in that role, and to be able to lean into his very kind of like soothing like ASMR voice in the
Mm-hmm.
in the Odin role, because he has just this tenor where it's just a voice that you just want to be hearing. um, and so having that fundamental just like presence of what his voice means, and then the the amount that he could pour emotion into the role. Yeah, I agree. It's a real perfect fit, and we were really really fortunate that that Jordan made that connection, and that we were able to reach out to Carl and make that happen.
And then while you guys were like filming and recording like the actual ending, like was that hard to actually nail what you were going for? Like basically a broken man finally letting go after all of those years, or was that something that just kind of naturally happened?
I I I mean, it's one of those things that I've been so impressed. Where that was the first time that I had directly voice directed an actor before, but like the degree that performers are able to connect with those you know like legitimate emotions within themselves and bring them forward is just always so impressive. I mean, there was one take when we were recording Gone Home with Sarah Grayson, who is Sam's voice. There was one audio diary. It was the one that was about when Lonnie played her last show and dedicated a song to Sam, and Sam just like couldn't take it. It was too much for her to stay and listen to it. And that audio diary was one take, because Sarah got partway through it, and then she just wasn't going anymore, and we like looked, and she was just like sobbing, and then she kind of composed herself and read through the rest of it, and that like she just got into that place, you know, that she was the character in that moment, and we were like, A, we're not going to put you through that again, and B, we're not going to get a more authentic read of this moment than that one take that we did of that. And that's sometimes just the place that you get with actors that are so talented and have such a connection to what they do, is that I think, you know, Carl could put himself in the shoes of that character, and kind of in that transportative sense just express what he felt as that character in that space in a way that's so just so genuine. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, that, like I said, just the first time actually experiencing that, it's like a punch straight to the gut. So he did an excellent job with that, and I cannot understate that like anymore. Like he did a
Yeah,
phenomenal job.
yeah, yeah.
So now overall, I suppose the final question, besides like a bonus question where I'll let you kind of do whatever you want on that one.
Sure.
But this one actually was brought up by a subscriber of mine, and he goes by the username of Tree of Hell, and it's kind of alluding to the ending of Minerva's Den, not the not Porter letting Pearl go, but more or less when Tenenbaum says, "Take your time, Mister Porter," and the game deliberately makes you like walk extremely slow. Is that intentional to make you really grasp what you experienced all throughout the story, being able to look at all the different like surroundings and stuff like that and really kind of break down everything you experienced? Or was that just kind of something that needed to be done from a technical aspect?
Oh, it definitely wasn't like a technical thing like streaming or anything like that. It was really um, trying to um, reinforce the space that the character was in, and hopefully that the player is in, right? Because you know there's this kind of break point where you finish the fight with Wall, you leave the Thinker's chamber, and you get into the elevator that takes you down to Porter's personal quarters and laboratory. And it's that point where you get into the elevator that we hide your hands, you don't have guns anymore. When you step out of the elevator, yeah, you have a slower walk speed than usual.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, it's restrictive, you know, we're like you can't go fast, you can't shoot stuff. Um, but it's a form of communication. You know what I mean? It's like if you could just be like shooting rockets at you know this stuff that is not about that, then as the designers we're kind of putting that responsibility on you. You know,
Yeah.
we're like you're pointing guns at everything, but don't shoot it because that would be silly. Whereas if we can say, you know, Porter has had kind of the blinders taken off. You know, you're in a way, Porter is more in control now of this experience than he has been up to this point. So as you go down into his personal space, he becomes a person who is no longer being aggressive towards what he's going to encounter. He's taking his time being in this space that has personal meaning to him, and hopefully it, you know, very kind of like in an unspoken way encourages the player. It kind of gives the player permission to say like this is about finding what's here and engaging with it if you want to. This is about Porter just kind of being in this space to be in the space, and hopefully you know, there aren't the distractions of these kind of mechanics that aren't relevant to what's happening here to be pulling you away from what is the center of the focus in that section of the game.
And then a little
And it was
bit.
interesting.
Oh,
Oh, I was just gonna say it's interesting because um, at the time when we were developing the game, there were definitely you know folks on the dev team who were like, we built this space, we built this cool cavern with like these walkways and stuff. Like there should be some combat in there. Like this is a cool combat space. It's a bummer that it's just like you don't actually get to do anything in there. And like I totally heard that. I was like, I see where you're coming from, but you've just beaten the big boss. So now if you just like shred a couple extra splicers at the end, that's sort of like anticlimactic. But also, this space just has a different purpose, and so saying like the absence of those things is what makes this few minutes at the end of the experience effective, and kind of doubles down on what it's about and doesn't have any distractions in it, is the intent here. But until we saw it on screen, and until it was something that you had really seen in a Bioshock game, which wasn't really part of the identity of the series up to that point, I think um, it it wasn't necessarily completely intuitive. Like, what is this space for? What is this experience really going to be like if all you've got is you and the environment? But then once we got it all into space and within the pacing and the overall arc of what led up to it, and where you get by the end, I think it was something that ended up really kind of like tying the whole experience together in the end.
And then I think kind of like my interpretation of that as well. It's like you actually get to physically not only see but kind of hear Porter finally starting to let go, finally realizing that no matter what he tries or what he does from this point forward, he can't bring Pearl back. So
Yeah.
like being able to just take that leisurely walk to the bathysphere, you get to think about it as a player, all the experiences and stuff like that, and you just actually get to hear him finally accept what happened. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like he went through all like the stages of grief and he finally ended on acceptance. So I
Yeah.
thought that was well done with that as well. And then I also liked a couple of the Easter eggs that was in the bathysphere as well, with like the Lot 192 and Jack's wrench. I thought that was pretty
Yep.
well done. So here's the bonus question for you. So,
Okay.
is there anything currently? Obviously, I know some of the stuff you're working on, but
Sure.
is there anything else currently that you're working on, or anything that you would like to personally promote to the people watching? You have all the time that you'd like.
Probably don't need that much. No, so we're at Fulbright. We're currently working on our new game called Open Roads, which we're working on with Annapurna Interactive as a publishing partner. And it's a mother-daughter road trip mystery game. So we're kind of taking our Gone Home Tacoma environmental exploration stuff that we do and applying it to a road trip journey where you play as Tess Devine, who's a girl that's going on this kind of road trip adventure to these abandoned family properties with her mom. So the idea behind the game is, you know, you're exploring these environments, you're finding stuff, you're putting the pieces of this mystery together, and you actually have another character in the room with you, and it's really about what is her perspective on what you're finding versus what your interpretation is. How are you navigating that relationship with this other character that's going on the journey with you, as well as the environments that you're exploring and what you're finding and what the story is that's embedded in them. So that'll be coming out at some sort of point in the future. We're working on it right now. We don't exactly know what our release date is, or even launch platforms at this point. We're finalizing a lot of stuff about the release of the game, but you can look at Open Roads Game on Twitter. You can go to openroads.game. The thing that I always recommend is if people want to go to the Fulbright Games website or openroads.game and subscribe to the newsletter. I personally write the newsletters for Fulbright, and it's sort of like every few months you just kind of get a message with some updates about, if our games have been in the press, or if we've done, some release anything else about what we're working on, or there are updates for our existing titles, like, our games coming to new platforms or any kind of stuff like that, but also really just sort of like a personal message about where we're at and what's been going on with the studio and everything. Um, but aside from that, I can promote like a couple of games that I think if people are Bioshock fans and they like the the narrative of those games, the narrative experience of those games, that they might enjoy. I know that it came out at this point like a year and a half, 2 years ago, but relatively recently, like 6 months ago or something like that. I played Disco Elysium, which I thought was fucking amazing. Like the writing, just the pure like prose writing in that game is just fantastic, and the sense of world building that that the fictional universe has, just it has that feeling of this deeply considered kind of like, it's not like it would be a Bioshock setting, but it has that same sense of craft to like this imagined city that you spend time in, and it's a super super interesting interpretation of like kind of like a classic computer RPG, but applied to this setting and this kind of style of play that's totally unique to Disco Elysium. Um, so I don't know, that came to mind. If you haven't played it and you're a fan of kind of narrative driven games with these really deep fictional worlds, I would highly recommend it.
Is there anything else you would like to promote, like where people could follow you or anybody else, like Twitter, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at Fulbright. The name of the company. The company is named after my Twitter, not the other way around. So yeah, if you want to follow me, be my guest. I don't really post on Twitter very much these days.
And I'll make sure to put all of that in the description for you, so
Yeah,
no worries
yeah.
there.
I mean, I would say maybe we're in the States. Maybe we're like on the way out of the COVID times, but if there's any place that you really value, that I'm sure has been having challenges during COVID, places like independent movie theaters and restaurants and bars that are in your area that you can support in any kind of way, with like buying gift certificates, or if they accept donations, or just getting takeout. Obviously there's a million uh, uh, worthy causes that you could donate to on any given day, but um, you know there's some value to keeping it local. So if there's a place that you would just be super bummed if they didn't make it through, and we're there when stuff opens back up, you know if you can find it in your heart to kind of like prepay into into them being around when you can actually take advantage of them again. I think that you know I've tried to do that to the degree that I can, and I know how much those folks appreciate the support in this time when they aren't able to have their doors open in a lot of cases.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, other than that, thank you again. I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to
Yeah,
do this interview. And hopefully we get to see this game soon. I'm actually really excited for that.
awesome. Thanks. We're working hard on it, and I'm excited to be able to share more of it before too long.
Well, thank you again. So
Yeah, thank you for
hopefully
having me. It was a great discussion. Yeah.
hopefully you guys enjoyed. And again, be sure to go check out all of his links. I will be providing them in the description for you guys. And I just hope you enjoyed it. So take care, stay safe, and I will talk to you guys in a future video. Peace.
Thanks.